Hello, everyone. My name is Jimmy Smith, and welcome to episode number 20 of the Rambler Podcast, where we are passionate about sharing what makes Cathedral Prep the standard of excellence. On this episode of the podcast, we feature our second edition of our Info Session series and have Mr. Will Pituch on as a guest to talk more about the Academic Pathway Program. Will is the VP of Academics and Student Affairs, a position he has been in now for the past 5 years. He is a 2001 graduate of Villa Maria Academy and is in his 11th year at the school, serving his first 6 years as a teacher in the Social Studies Department. So we're excited to have Will here as a guest to share more about the Academic Pathway Program. And just want to say, Will, thanks for joining us and welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jimmy. It's an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and dive right into this. Do you mind talking to us a little bit about what is the Academic Pathway Program?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we started developing our academic pathway programs. They're really focused on students that come in the door already having a good sense or a good idea about what they want to pursue in terms of either their post-secondary educational training or their professional training. So the first program that we really launched headlong into was our MedPath program, which is focusing on obviously medical careers, medical fields. And then in the last few years, we've also added architecture, engineering, our business path, technology path, and our global studies path. And so as a result, the idea is to get freshmen engaged in co-curricular pieces, so their classes, right, specific coursework that is also linked with extracurricular activities from everything like go to speakers to field trips and other events to help supplement their understanding and preparation for what they ultimately want to do with the rest of their lives.
Right. And I'm throwing this question out there to you too. In regards to students who maybe fear like, oh, am I committed to a pathway program? What if I don't like it? Do you consider that a success too?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think that's the second most, when I talk to families about this, individual families, individual students, when they inquire their freshman year about this, because that's when students enter into the path programs, that's the second most valuable thing that they can get out of a path program, is to get exposure to anything, any one of the 5 paths. So let's take architecture and engineering. And a student starts, getting into it, and, sophomore year or maybe early junior year, they're like, I kind of like this whole design thing, but, I don't really like math that much. Well, guess what? If you don't like math, architecture and engineering, probably not going to be the direction you're going to head, right? Now, you might say, well, that's kind of a bummer. And, we have obviously plenty of elective courses, plenty of other options for students to be able to pursue and everything like that informally without being in a path program. But you just saved at least 1 semester of college tuition, if not a year or 2 years of college tuition, because you learned more about this of what you thought you were interested in. And then you're like, oh, maybe this isn't for me 100%. Yeah. And that's A-OK too. There's no penalty. There's no, it's no mark against a student in any way, shape, or form. It gives them the ability to just discern through that academic preparation at the end of the day. And that's like I said, the second most valuable thing that can come out of the program.
And that's one of the things that, as I've been learning more about the pathway programs, I was personally excited about because I did go to Slippery Rock. I started undeclared for a whole semester. Mm-hmm. I did exercise science for a year and a half, just ended up switching to business. So, in regards to the value that you were just talking about with the college level, I mean, to get that experience here as a student in high school is so valuable. So that's why I was really excited about hearing about these pathway programs and, just talking about that. That's a success in its own right too, like you said. So can you walk me through, when did this program start? Why did we start this program? How did it all came about?
Yeah, so one of the things that, we're always doing research, looking to see what other schools, places are working on doing. And one of the things that we were seeing was that but this is, and then also we always have to reflect internally about what we're doing at all times. And one of the big takeaways was we were seeing that for a stretch there, we're looking at 25 to 35% of our graduates were going into healthcare fields to some capacity, whether that's pre-med, whether that's nursing, physical therapy, right? Wide variety, but again, it was ranging between 25 and 35% for a number of years. And so he said, like, well, what are we doing internally to really try to prepare our students effectively for those career fields, right? Yeah. And some of that goes into like core course requirements and things like that. When we start talking about what does the curriculum look like, especially when we were still in a dual campus model,
right?
And so one of the things, on top of like, revisiting some of those curricular pieces, we also said, oh man, that would be really interesting to do something. And we found a couple schools that were doing similar programs because, it was like, hey, we know we got a lot of students that want to do this, but there's more. If you're interested in medical science, there's more than just going and being a nurse or a doctor.
Right.
And how do we get students linked into those areas so that they save more time?
Right.
Like I said, a couple other schools in the Cleveland area were already kind of like starting some of these programs, and we went. Father Jabo and I at the time, went and took a couple tours, and said, hey, this is a no-brainer, an absolute no-brainer, especially when you look at the number of Prep and Villa alums that are in the healthcare industry throughout the area. It was like, okay, if you've got a good connection with local healthcare providers, which again, Prep and Villa have the connections, right?
Right.
Locally, and you said like, okay, we just need to build in some additional coursework, and then ultimately start working with community partners. How do we think we can make this work? And also, when we started, really, investing in this in going into the 2019-2020 school year, this is a great way for us to be able to pull our two campuses together, right? And that was a big piece of it as well.
Yeah.
And again, it also fed really nicely into the consolidation at the same time. So we really rolled out, in 2019, 2020, the end of 2020, really rolled out that program, even though we were in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
Which that could just go away, but
yeah. And like you said, you kind of started with the medical sciences, and then you touched on some of the other ones that we've had. Can you talk briefly about like a little bit of an overview of each of the programs?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So architecture engineering is exactly, so we call it internally our A&E path, right? I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. Again, whereas MedPath is very heavily, heavily restricted in terms of like academic preparation, students in honors and AP level courses and things like that. The A&E path is very similar. From the standpoint of particularly with math courses, students do need to have a certain level of math proficiency to be able to progress through that program.
Yeah.
Then also adding everything from like technical drawing to graphic design to
right.
A lot of those other pieces are really, really important so that students get a really, really great conceptual understanding so that when they start in college, after going through this program, I think currently we only have freshmen and sophomores in that path, whereas we're graduating our first group out of MedPath this year.
Awesome.
That's the intention, is that they will have the skills so that when they're going into those intro to architecture, intro to engineering courses, that they're a step above.
Right.
Right. Like we use the example. One of the counselors from one of the schools that we visited over in the Cleveland area had said he had served in the Army during the Vietnam War, so older guy, and he had said he was in the band when he got drafted.
Yeah.
And so he's like, anybody that was in the band already knew how to march. He said, so we already knew how to march. So all the time that all the other recruits were learning how to march, we got to learn how to do other things so then we were then more qualified for those leadership positions
right.
The professors took notice of like, oh, hey, this kid has more aptitude, more ability. We're going to get them, like I said, leadership opportunities, additional internships and all that other fun stuff. That's exactly what it's designed for.
Right.
So anyways, sorry, I digress. Business path, the business path, a lot of the other paths now focus a little bit more on like elective courses as opposed to core course preparation. Business path focuses on areas like marketing, entrepreneurship, a lot of those other components that go into business. Because let's be honest, like sometimes people talk about like a business degree and it's like, oh, it's just a business degree. Like the reality is if you're going to be good at business, that means you need to be good at a lot of different things.
That's
right? So it's everything from accounting, like I said, to marketing, entrepreneurship, art. How do you train somebody to be an entrepreneurial thinker? Some people just are. That's something that you can actually be trained to do, right? In the midst of it, and then ultimately learning to find parallels and synergies, across a variety of market areas. The global studies path is a little bit more amorphous because it's like everything from like pre-law, political science, history, and pulling all of those features together. So students get a little bit more of a grab bag of electives to be able to choose from, and it's more about like awareness of like everything from like current events in law. All the way over to comparative politics, speech and debate, and a lot of those other skill sets that go hand in hand there. And then the last one with the technology path, that's probably, I think that one's probably like the most fun from the standpoint of, when you say like a broad umbrella of something like technology, it's all kinds of stuff. It's everything from 3D printing to robotics to graphic design. To overlaps with all of the other pathway programs at the same time, because that permeates throughout everything. And so that's really where students have a unique opportunity to be like, hey, well, this kind of interests me, this area of technology, I'm going to go explore further. And that's where having flexibility in the curriculum of looking at independent studies and working with local partnerships, especially in the downtown environment, right? That was one of the other pieces. When we were, in the dual campus model, that was tough because there's a lot of downtown partners, but Villa's 3 miles away from downtown, and then coordination. I mean, we saw that in the dual enrollment program with students taking classes over again, and that kind of stuff. So that's where each one of those paths are. Also, one component that I want to make sure everyone's aware of is there is always an ethics piece or a faith component in each one of the paths as well. Too. And that was like really, really important. So like architecture and engineering, students take sacred architecture, right? So they go and they study about church architecture, a variety of different backgrounds, experiences, and if you haven't been around Erie very long, or you maybe just not super interested in this, some of the architectural pieces of the churches in throughout Erie County are amazing. Yeah. Right. Obviously we're blessed to be at the Cathedral, right, where there's a lot there, but all throughout is really, really awesome, and the woman who teaches that does a phenomenal job. With that, but that piece is in place. MedPath, there's biomedical ethics, right? So students are learning about like contemporary topics and issues in biomedical debates, right? Of like, and learning specifically the Catholic perspective, right? But at the same time, also bringing in like, hey, this is where like the industry, the field is kind of having these debates, right? Everything from stem cells to cloning and anything and everything in between of like, is this ethical, right? Is this okay? Like, what does this say about, the sanctity of human life or what role do, animal testing and all that other stuff play in items as well. Business law and ethics, I think I already mentioned that previously. Those pieces permeate each one of the paths at the same time.
Well, and just hearing more, as you were just talking now, I already knew about the pathway programs. Just here with you listening again, it gets me excited because, if I was a high school student and I had an interest in entrepreneurship, for whatever reason, my dad was a business owner or whatever it is, I'd be excited to be in these pathway programs because how much it's going to prepare me for the future. And I guess, you've kind of talked about that a little bit, but can you talk now about like a student who's in these pathway programs, how do you see that benefiting them long term as compared to maybe a student who, take myself, we didn't have the pathway programs when I was a student. How is that a step above now?
I think the biggest piece, Jimmy, is when you look at the landscape of preparation. Yeah. Right? The reality is top-notch students, what's going to differentiate you from somebody else when you're looking to go to a top 50 research institution? Right? When you're looking to go to, Ivy League schools and those kinds of items. This is like that differentiator, in terms of like the college application process. Right. It's also a big differentiator because honestly, the lessons that the students are learning, the sooner you learn them and the better you learn them, the more that's going to set you up to be able to be successful in the future.
Absolutely.
So if you're learning and you're talking to people with experience now, at age 14, 15, 16, and as you go, those connections are the things that are going to pay off more than anything else, right?
Yeah.
When we talk about, the family of what Prep Villa, from the Prep Brotherhood, the Villa Sisterhood, and some brothers, right, in Villa like myself, those connections are connections that last a lifetime.
Yeah.
And if you can couple those family connections with those professional connections,
right,
that's where you really see that opportunity to take off.
Yeah.
Right. And so that students, rather than being like, oh, ho hum, what am I going to do? Or I'm struggling because I don't know where connection to find the right job is. Because really, if you look at the market data, more recent college graduates, they're holding out for the right job, right? And what helps you get the right job is having the connections in the industries that you want to be in,
right?
And that's ultimately what this is designed to do. Somewhat on the local network, but it can be a launch pad into bigger things outside of the region and area.
And we were talking a lot about the curriculum and the coursework of the kids in each of the pathways. Can you talk a little bit about some of the involvement that we're doing to take efforts among community businesses and organizations in terms of, what with the guest speakers or job shadows? Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, so obviously right now, like I said, the MedPath program is the most developed because that's the one that we got off the ground first. Is, obviously, being in Erie, a lot of great local partnerships. The folks up at Allegheny Health Network have been phenomenal. We've got some really, really great connections there. LECOM has obviously been a great partner as well. UPMC and Hammett has also played a little bit of a role. A couple other nursing homes and things like that in the area have also helped out. And so that's, like I said, the most developed. But when you start talking about, one of the things also in our world being college preparatory, the post-secondary educational partners in the area are hugely, hugely important. Obviously, the natural connection between prep and Gannon, right? I mean, every one of the paths mesh really nicely with what, a lot of the great programs that Gannon's got going on right now. So that's our first and foremost partner in a big way. Penn State Barron has been really, really great, in terms of offering and starting to develop a lot of those connections as well. They're a little bit less developed in the health science areas, but with a lot of the other paths, they're good. Mercyhurst University has also been, great partner, developing some really great connections on that front at the same time. And then you start talking about some of the local businesses and that's where we're weaving now to start developing and building more of those connections. We have a lot of alums in the area that are in manufacturing, engineering, and plastics and things like that, which is hugely beneficial for students and opportunities on the horizon.
Yeah, and I think the opportunity for the kids to have somebody from one of those organizations come in, be a guest speaker, talk about what they do as an engineer all day, but then follow up and have the kids go do a field trip and go see the actual plant and walk it. I think that takes the program to a whole nother level when you start to incorporate the real world application as well. But yeah, just a couple other questions for you as we wind down the podcast here. So MedPath was the first one that started a handful of years ago. We're starting to graduate the first group of that. Where do you see in the next 5 years these pathway programs growing into?
Yeah, Jimmy, that's the exciting piece, right? So, obviously, important work you've been doing from the advancement office, and I feel blessed to be helping, assisting on that end as well, of looking for those community partnerships and how do we get some additional funding in, because how do we get more resources for our students for updating technology, making sure that they the trips, the experiences, that we can get levels of expertise in to be able to talk with our students. When you look at what the STEAM Hub is right now on the third floor, which already has some really neat stuff, but that's going to require constant upkeep and development, right? I mean, if we've learned anything about what is the technological half-life, right, anymore of items, we always need to be updating. We always need to be focused on making sure our students have the most up-to-date tools, software, 3D printers, whatever it ends up being. That's super duper important. And then the other piece is as these programs get more students in them, as they get more developed, having the staff have the available time to be able to focus on the development of these paths, because this also shifts into like how education is changing, in the 21st century is, there needs to be like teachers connections aren't just like what they're teaching in the classroom, right? The intention is we want these kids' teachers being their leaders, right? The coordinators of these paths, to have the release time necessary to be able to make sure that students are going on these trips, that they're coordinating these speakers, that we're having those opportunities, because as much as the classroom learning is essential and the foundation of everything that we're going to be doing, what's going to be the difference maker in these kids' preparation, students that are in the PATH programs, is going to be that co-curricular, that extracurricular opportunity, because they're going to be getting things that you literally can't get anywhere else. Right. And that's not just looking like locally, regionally, or something like that. That's looking on a bigger scale, and it's creating a unique experience that helps draw the connections between what we're doing here at Prep with all of those other businesses, colleges and universities, not just locally here in Erie, but regionally and nationally, which is something that, the school has always been about.
Right. Absolutely. No, it's a very exciting program, and I think the more and more people start to explore and find out about it, particularly the families that are here now and future students, it's an exciting opportunity for kids to take advantage to, like you said, be a little bit more prepared than their counterparts and set themselves up a little bit further ahead. And let alone you're investing in yourself in an area that you're interested in already, so it's very beneficial. For any families or students listening to this now, or future families that are interested in the pathway programs, who would you recommend they contact if they want to get more information?
Well, I mean, I've kind of been like the designer of a lot of these, and all the information is online. Tim Doherty, our VP of Enrollment Management, is always a phenomenal resource. Outside of my my assistant principals, I work with Tim probably the closest here at the school, because anybody coming in, any question, about what's going on or all those other things, I work with Tim and Christine. And Christine, the assistant vice president of enrollment management, and Tim and Christine are awesome, phenomenal human beings, and they do excellent work for our families that are interested in exploring the school. But everybody's always willing to answer any questions humanly possible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So, we'll just say a final plug as we kind of wind out on the podcast here. If you're somebody, a student, a future family, or family now that's interested in the pathway programs, get a hold of Will, get a hold of Tim Doherty, start to find out more information. Or if you're somebody listening to this podcast and you want to be involved, whether you're a business or organization and you want to help support the program, whether financially or with your time, to start to come as a guest speaker, have the kids come for a job shadow or whatever, contact me, and I'm happy to get you connected with the right people to get you set up and get that going for the next school year. So, but no, just want to say, Will, thanks for the time to come on the podcast, talking about the pathway programs. I know I'm excited in learning more about it, and I appreciate you designing these, getting them going, and creating these for the school.
No, awesome. Happy to be of service, Jimmy. Happy to be of service.
Awesome. Thanks again, Will.
No, you bet.